Before we jump back into it real quick, um, I want to show everybody in the online learning system under the Julie folder. Online learning system, down here under the Julie folder, we now have our end of course exam review. So this answers the question. The syllabus tells you what you can expect to see on your state exam. The end of course exam review can tell you what you can expect to see on my exam. And this applies to the retake as well. Everybody good with that? There's only one review for both tests, the end of class exam and the retake. So this can just kind of help you hone it in, narrow it down. We're not even halfway there yet. So you may not want to, you may just kind of want to tuck this away until we get closer to exam time. We're still a few months out. But it's here, it's available. Maybe you want to start grabbing it and taking a look at it. Don't forget, you guys, these flat PDFs, you got your little download box up here in the top near the top right. So a little box with the arrow in it, you can download it and save it or print it or do whatever you do. But end of course exam review is ready. And of course, we'll talk more about, like I said, we're not even halfway there yet. So we still have a little ways to go. So before we jump back into agency, do you guys have a chance to spend some time with agency this weekend? Head bobs, good, kind of, sort of, good, 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 good. Please remember to be building this time into study. But I want you guys, let's do something for check-in this morning. So set your chats to private or direct message or whatever they call it on your end. And I want you all to send me a private chat and remind me, and you can abbreviate, I understand, but remind me what duties we owe our customer. What duties do we owe our customer? Customer. And if you're just joining us, good morning and welcome. We are in a private chat. We are in a private chat telling me what duties you owe your customer. Good morning. Just another minute. If you're just joining us, good morning. We're talking about the duties we owe our customer. And I'd like to hear from you. If you don't know, say IDK. We're doing this for our check-in. Are we in? So I'm getting about 50-50. So let's recap. Let's refresh. Remember, y'all, I can take my market, wherever I choose to work, I can take my market and I can take all the people in the market and I can put them in two categories. Either you're my client or you're my customer. If you're my client, it means that you have hired my firm. Remember, the agency relationship is between the client and the firm. So if you're my client, you've hired my firm through the use of an agency agreement. And once you've hired us, we owe the client OCAR. OCAR helps us remember the duties that we owe the client, the one that hires us. The customer then is the one that didn't hire us, the one in the transaction that didn't enter into an agency relationship with us. The customer gets honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. So let's rattle that off together. What does the customer get? Honesty, fairness, disclosure of material facts. Is that how y'all rattle stuff off? One more time. What does the customer get? Honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. That's right. The client gets OCAR. The client gets obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill, care, and diligence. So we have this understanding of it helps us better understand my duties in this relationship. And as we get going today, we're going to talk about the different ways that we can practice agency, or the firm can practice agency. So a little bit more on that. So make sure, let's go back to the beginning of Unit 7. We started on 134. And on 134, we kind of talked about the history, how agency came to be, how we know it today, still evolving, still changing. Don't expect agency to get stagnant, because it's not. That's one of our jokes in this industry, y'all. The only thing consistent about real estate is change. So how we practice agency today very well could change. Expect that. But today, and then on page 137, we started by defining some words, having an understanding of what those words mean so we can apply them. On 138, we get into OCAR, our responsibilities to our principal, also our client. Remember, we use those words interchangeably. Principal, client, I would write an equal sign. Client equals principal, principal equals client. So there's our OCAR, our obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill, care, and diligence. And then at the bottom of page 141, we talk about our responsibility to third parties, also known as our customer. So the customer is the third party. Again, write that down. Customer equals third party. Third party equals customer. And there's our honesty and fairness and our disclosure of material facts. Remember, we always have a duty to disclose material facts. I don't care who you're talking to. Are you talking to the client? Are you talking to the customer? We always have that duty to disclose material facts. Speaking of material facts, we get into that on page 142, specifically 143. You know, material facts is a very broad topic, not helpful at all. It's the fact that anybody, a reasonable person, would consider relevant when making a decision. Well, it doesn't help us. So what does help us? The top of 143 gets specifics. The Real Estate Commission has defined a material fact about the property itself. Water intrusion issues, electrical issues, mechanical issues, roof leaks, anything like that. It's a fact relating directly to the property. So it's not on the property, but it affects the property. Proposed zoning amendment. NCDOT plans to widen the highway or the road nearby. I don't know, they're going to redraw the school board lines. Those are facts that relate directly to the property. There's facts relating directly to the ability of our client to complete the transaction. This is the one we talked about, kind of makes us stop and go, because we just said we owe that client confidentiality. But now we're saying that we have a duty to disclose if you find out your client can't complete the transaction. The reason being is because that affects the other side. So we're under contract and your buyer gets denied their loan. Does that affect the seller? Yeah, because now they can't buy, and the seller has a right to know that. The last one there is for us. This is facts to know to be of specific importance. And this takes us back to, if it's important to my client, then it's important to me. If it's important to my customer, then it's important to me. We have this duty of specific importance to a party. So once they share something of specific importance to me, it's not like I necessarily need to run out and blab it to the world. But if they tell me their end use, if the seller tells me how much they need to make in this transaction, if the buyer tells me they can't live in a home that had dogs, whatever, think of it, any reason. Once it's important to them, then it becomes important to me. And I have a material fact on my hand. I have a duty to make sure that they get what they want, they get what they need. And then with material facts at the bottom of page 143, we got into what I call the big four. And the big four is the prohibited conduct. If you mishandle a material fact, you could be guilty of one of the four prohibited conducts. When you see this test question, you're going to be given a scenario and you're going to be asked A, B, C, or D. Prohibited conducts A, B, C, or D. As you're going through the scenario, I always suggest asking yourself first, did the broker in this scenario lie, or did they keep their mouth shut? Did they put out false information, misrepresent the information, or did they keep their mouth shut and not say anything? This could be verbal, this could be email, this could be text, this could be advertising. Doesn't matter. They didn't put the information out. So once we've determined if they lie or omitted it, then you go back through the scenario and determine if they did it willfully, like with knowledge, or negligently. We looked at examples starting on page 144 of the Big Four. We also introduced you to the comments. I'm going to go back to the online learning system, license law and commission rule. We introduced you to the comments. The comments give you other examples of the Big Four. I think the examples help. And we could sit and read the definition all day long, but what does that mean? We put it in practice, and putting it in practice are what the examples are giving us. And these are the scenarios, these are the examples of the scenarios that you can expect to see on your exam and being asked. And then we landed on 147 with additional duties. I did not get into these right now. You can find additional duties and the examples in the comments. License law and commission rule is the very last section, major section in this class. So we'll revisit those additional duties, talk more about that when we get there. But it doesn't hurt you to go ahead and look over those additional duties now. Knowing we'll get more involved in them when we get to our state specific section, which is license law and commission rule. So that's where we left each other on, when did I see y'all last? I don't know, last week. I guess that was Thursday, whenever I saw you guys last. That's where we left each other. What questions or comments do I have just up to this point?
I have a question.
Yes.
What is principal again?
The principal is our client.
Okay.
The principal, the client, they're the ones that hire us. And they do so through the use of an agency agreement. Now we're dancing around agency agreement right now. We'll get into our agency agreements in Unit 8. So here we are, bottom of page 147. And I don't know, I kind of didn't like starting class this way because it's kind of starting with a little bit of doom and gloom, but it's real, it's testable. So we got to start somewhere. So the bottom of page 147 kind of answers the question, what if you do wrong? What if you breach on your agreement? Now, again, we're going to talk about that agency agreement, the duties that client and firm owe each other. But what if the agent messes up? What if the firm messes up? Well, anytime the agent is in breach, they could face several things. Always remember, you guys, the real estate commission isn't going to fine you. The real estate commission disciplines, they reprimand your license. The real estate commission giveth you your license, and guess what? The real estate commission can taketh it away. So disciplinary action by the real estate commission, there's only one time that the real estate commission can fine you. Does anybody remember what that one time is? Only one licensee that can be fined. Everyone venture a guess. Yeah, there it is. The timeshare developer. The timeshare developer is the only person that can be fined. So unless you're going into timeshare development, you don't have to worry about being fined. Listen to me, by the commission. Can the court fine you? Could somebody hire an attorney and take you to court? Heck yeah. So what all could happen? I mean, you guys see the laundry list in front of you. Disciplinary action by the real estate commission. So this is kind of how this works, short and sweet of how this works. The consumer feels that you breached their agency duties. They feel that you didn't provide them the service that they expected or desired. They file a complaint at the real estate commission, or they hire an attorney and the attorney gets the real estate commission involved. Just because they file a complaint doesn't mean you're going to get in trouble. We all know, I mean, y'all, like Yelp has made us all online critics, right? And same thing with the commission. They understand just because a complaint is filed doesn't mean that it's disciplinary action worthy. The commission will review the complaint, and if they find there's a possible violation of license law and or commission rule, then the commission sends the broker what's known as a letter of inquiry. Your letter of inquiry is your opportunity to respond to the complaint. And how do you think you respond to the complaint? You're going to be able to call the commission and say, I didn't do it. You think that's going to work for you? Now we're in a he said, she said situation. You respond with your documentation. Remind me what we document? Everything. Why? I don't want to see any of y'all be in a situation where you know you didn't do it, but you didn't have the proof. Everybody with me? Your documentation is all you got. They're going to ask you for the applicable paperwork. May that be an agency agreement, disclosure, whatever else is involved. And then they're going to want to see your documentation. So y'all keep those email correspondence, keep those text messages, keep that information because that's your out. So you respond to the letter of inquiry. The commission reviews it. If they need more information, they'll reach out to you. In some cases, it doesn't happen often, but in some cases, they invite the broker down to Raleigh to meet, to stand in front of the commissioners and state their case. At any time during the disciplinary action, we are always welcome to get our own representation. And if you have to go to Raleigh, I highly recommend you take your attorney with you. So at any time during the disciplinary action, we are always welcome to get our own representation. So anyway, they review, they gather the information, and then they make a decision. And at the end of the decision, they either say, thank you for your cooperation, this matter is closed, or they issue disciplinary action. Disciplinary action could be like a slap on the wrist. Don't do that again. And actually, since the violation was about agency, we want you to take some additional CE classes. Let's get you some more training so you don't do this again. They could suspend your license. I've seen suspensions for 2 months, 6 months, 2 years. They could revoke your license. If they revoke your license, they take it back. Remind me, what is the commission's number one purpose? What is their number one purpose? And I can see mouths moving.
Protect the public.
That's it. Protect the public. So through this disciplinary action, the commission's question is, how badly did you harm my public? How badly did you harm my public? Violations of license law and commission rule. If you've been, oh, this gets better. If you've been disciplined, suspend your license, revoke your license, slap on the wrist, not so much. But if you've been disciplined by the Real Estate Commission, the commission publishes an e-bulletin once a month. And there's a tab on the e-bulletin called disciplinary actions. And when you click on that tab, it lists your name, your city, your firm, what you did, and what happened to your license. They call that the wall of shame. Every month that goes out to your peers. It's available to the public. And in addition, and I recently found this out, in addition, they'll also print it in the local paper. So now grandma knows you messed up too, right? So if nothing else, it seems to be, and I see y'all's expressions and I love it, because whatever, disciplinary action, suspend my license for 6 months, what's the big deal? The printing your name, printing it in the paper, putting it in the e-bulletin, that's the one that sticks, isn't it? So I always say, and y'all remember I'm old school. So when I started in real estate, we didn't have this fancy e-bulletin. They mailed us one, snail mailed us a newsletter every month. And we always said we pulled that thing out of the mailbox and we always went straight to the back of the bulletin because that's where the disciplinary actions were. So we always say, conduct your real estate business to stay out of the back of the bulletin. And how do we stay out of the back of the bulletin? License, law, and commission rule, which is why we're here, you guys. This is what we mean by building that foundation, by giving you that information. So the Real Estate Commission can discipline our license. Again, the rest of this is talking about going to court. So the injured party could take you to court. The court could fine you. Civil action, you could be sued for money damages. Criminal prosecution could be a misdemeanor, maybe a criminal act outside of license, law, and commission rule, but you still violated a crime. And then some kind of civil liability, again, just sued or found liable. So we saw this the other day, but this just goes to show, this is the disciplinary actions that the Real Estate Commission took. This is 21, 22, 22, 23 didn't look much different, I'll be honest, which is why I didn't worry about updating it. The only thing is I think material facts are up to like 48%. So when we talk about the importance of properly disclosing material facts, this is why, because half of our disciplinary actions for the last 2-3 years have been all about material facts. You guys, we can expect to hear all about material facts. And we did a deep dive here. You'll get it in post licensing. You'll get it in CE. Quite frankly, we've had material facts in CE for the last, 4-6 years. Because look at across the board, across the state, how are we doing with material facts? Not good. So until we can do better, we can expect to see it in our CE classes. Some of these other violations, again, it's all a matter of license, law, and commission rule. Starting to build that foundation. Remember, we don't cover everything about real estate in pre-licensing. We're just building the foundation. Think about the foundation of a house. Do you always see the whole foundation, or sometimes it's underground, right? Kind of same thing here. You don't always see it. You don't always use it. But we're starting to build that foundation. You'll get more in post. You'll get more in CE. You'll get more in training from your firm. We're just easing you in. What questions do I have about the disciplinary action? So our agency agreements are a two-way street, which means the firm has duties to the client. And guess what? The client has duties to the firm. It's called a bilateral contract. We'll see that word in a couple of units. But it's called a bilateral contract, which means both parties have duties and obligations to each other. We just saw what could happen if the agent or the firm violates their duties to the principal. What happens if the principal, or what are the duties that the principal owes the agent? And their list is a lot shorter. The principal has to act in good faith. When the principal hired the firm, they hired us to do a very specific job. The seller has hired us to list and sell their property. The buyer has hired us to help them locate and purchase a property. Property managers, you've been hired to manage a property or more for the owner. So we have a very specific job. We're not hired to do anything. We're hired to do a very specific job. And if the principal stands in my way of doing the job they hired me to do, then they could be in violation. They could be in breach. The firm would have to take the principal to court in the event of breach. If you hire me to sell your home, list and sell your home, but you decline every single showing request, you never let a buyer in your front door, are you hindering my efforts? It's awfully hard for me to sell your home if you don't let a buyer in the front door. Does that make sense? And that's what we mean. Now, guys, I get it. You know, the whole house comes down with COVID. Yeah, I don't want showings for the next 2 or 3 days. You know, a lot more of us are working from home now. So we may need to work around work schedules. You almost always run into a seller with a new baby that takes a nap from 1 to 3. So can we work with them in their schedule? Absolutely. But there's a difference in working with them with their schedule than them saying no to every single show. Flip that coin. You're with a buyer that really wants to buy, but they're never available for showings, ever. Nope, tonight's not good. Tomorrow's not good. This weekend isn't great, but I got to buy something. Well, if I can't get you to walk in a front door with me, then you're hindering my efforts. So the principal has to act in good faith. And then another duty is the principal ensures my commission. That word ensure is very important. The one that hired me, maybe they're the one paying me, maybe they're not. But they still, in the agency agreements, they're going to ensure that I do get paid. We're going to see that insurement, the compensation, look at those agency agreements when we get to Unit 8. But we have to write something down for me. Agency agreements are employment contracts. You're hiring the firm to do a service. Does the firm expect to be paid once they perform the service? Yes. Agency agreements are employment contracts. Any employment contract is going to discuss, how do I get paid when I do the job you've hired me to do? In addition to the duties to us, to the firm, the principal also has, specifically the seller, has some duties to the third party. So if the seller, their duty would be to the buyer, the one that's buying their home. Who can remind me what caveat emptor means?
Buyer beware.
Caveat emptor, yeah, is buyer beware. So does the seller have to disclose? No, but guess what? That doesn't give the seller a golden ticket to lie. There's a difference in disclosing versus lying. So if the seller lies, if they flat out lie, they could be held liable. Buyers do take sellers to court after the transaction sometimes. But guys, I'm going to be really honest. When your buyer calls you after the transaction and says, this seller lied, what should I do? Don't say a word other than call your attorney. Because I don't know the outcome of this. I don't know the results. And I'll be really honest. Remember, caveat emptor, North Carolina favors the sellers. So the buyers are going to have a really good case. But you know what? That's not my job to determine. So when, not if, but when your buyer calls you after the transaction and they found something, buyer's remorse is a very real thing, especially with the price tag of a house on it. What do I do? The seller lied. What do I do? Call your attorney. See if you have a case. Sometimes they go to court, sometimes they don't. Either party, once they enter into a sales contract, both parties have duties and obligations to each other, buyer and seller. So when we say either party, we're referring to buyer and seller in the sales contract. And there's duties and obligations to both. And again, if they breach, then they could suffer, they could take each other to court. These contracts, sorry, I can't write and talk at the same time. These contracts have teeth, you guys. And when we enter into these contracts, may that be an agency agreement, may that be a sales contract. Once parties enter into these contracts, they have entered into legally binding agreements, which means if they don't do what they promised to do in the contract, they could be liable for breach. Again, what happens when they call you and say breach or lie or whatever? Don't even try to explain. Don't think about what you know. Your knee-jerk reaction is call your attorney. Well, what are they going to say? I don't know. It's a case-by-case thing. Correct. Agency agreements are employment contracts. Listing agreement is an agency agreement. Buyer's agency agreement is an agency agreement. Property management agreement is an agency agreement. So we have three main agency agreements that we deal with. And again, more on that when we get to unit 8. Breach could be break. You broke your promise. I promised you I'd do this and then I didn't. So now I'm in breach. Remember, Google's our friend, you guys. We're learning a whole bunch of new words.
Julie, where can I find this on the in the comments for the license law?
I don't know that this is in the comments.
Okay.
Much of what we talk about in 7 and 8 is, but not all of it. If the principal is in breach, maybe they breached to each other, maybe the seller lied or whatever. Again, the principal, client or customer actually could be held to civil lawsuit, criminal prosecution. The principal may, I'm stressing the word may here, may also be held responsible for my misconduct. And that's just referred to in the legal term as a tort. So if the principal lied to me, they gave me false information, and I had no way to know otherwise. My little red flag didn't go up. It didn't sound like a lie, right? They told me something, and then it's come to find out that they lied to me. They may also be held liable for my misconduct. Again, attorneys are involved like crazy. So let's say, for example, it's I don't know, it's a really dry winter. We haven't seen any moisture fall from the air in like months. It's a dry winter. And you go and list a home. And you do all the right things. You go in the basement, the unfinished basement, and you ask, is there any flooding issues? And they say, it's not rained in months. The seller told you no. Do you have a way to know otherwise? I mean, what are you going to do? You know, if you can't see it, they're telling you no. So you go on and sell the property, the buyer buys, and now they're the owner, and spring rolls around and we get all that spring rain, and guess what's happening in the basement? It's flooding. They're going to call you first. That may be an example of when the principal could be held liable for my actions. I had no other way of knowing. Again, we've got to be on the lookout for those little red flags. I cannot walk in the basement and say, oh, no signs of flooding here. It's all good. You guys are with me? You cannot, we're not ostriches. We cannot hide our heads in the sand. But if I have no way of knowing, other way of knowing. The other thing we need to be aware of, guys, this is where real estate gets fun. We just don't have to follow license law and commission rule. There are other acts out there that we have to follow. One of those other acts is called the Unfair Deceptive Trade Practices Act. It's all in the title. If you act unfairly or deceptively in your business, you could get in trouble. Sellers are held to this as well. Again, sellers can't lie, so they could be held under the Unfair Deceptive Trade Practices Act. Injured parties would be the one that was lied to. And under this act, we could be held to treble the damages. Who knows what treble means? Yeah. You take the amount of damages and you times it by 3. Again, I'm not an attorney. Neither are you, unless you are. Is anybody an active member of the North Carolina Bar Association? Awesome. We are not attorneys. Don't try to talk about what you think. Maybe you heard of a previous story. You heard of a previous client, or you had a coworker that had a similar situation. You know what that does for this situation? Absolutely nothing. It's all a case by case for the attorney to determine. Ooh, close. Page 149, we're talking about the classifications of agency relationship. These tend to be a problem topic. So I need you to dog ear this page, circle it, highlight it, make flashcards out of it after class. But when we talk about classification of agency relationships, it's just talking about the power that we have, the abilities that we have. I'm on page 149, top of page 149, classification of agency relationships. And this lets us know our power. This lets us know what duties we owe each other. Remind me, the agency relationship is between the client and who? The client and, yep. The agency relationship is between the client and the firm. The client hires the firm. The firm allows you to work with their buyer. The firm allows you to work with their seller. So classification, we talk about agency relationships. It's the relationship between the client and the firm. So the first level or tier that we have is the universal agent. The universal agent is full power of attorney. The universal agent has the power to make financial decisions, negotiating power, medical, I mean, everything. It's a full power of attorney. In real estate, in our agency relationships, the universal agent is the purple unicorn. How often do we see these things out in the wild? Never, ever. So how often do we have the universal agent in real estate in the agency relationship? Think about it. Would anybody in their right mind give Keller Williams full power of attorney? Would you give Alan Tate the ability to make all your decisions for you? So in the agency relationship, the universal agent has all the power. Compare this to if you took power of attorney for a parent, for example. It wouldn't be an agency relationship. It would be an individual. You could have full power of attorney for your parents. but the firm would not. That would be a separate thing. The universal agent, the purple unicorn that we just don't see in agency relationships. The next level is the general agent. The general agent has some power to act on behalf of somebody. They have limited decision-making authority. They can bind their client, bind their principal, commit them to the contract, the decision. We have two examples of the general agent, and when we see this in our agency relationships, the property manager is acting as a general agent to the owner. The property manager has some decision-making power. They have some ability to bind. How much? That's got to be spelled out in the property manager agreement. The agency agreement that the owner uses to hire the property manager. So for example, the property management agreement may say, the property manager has the authority to make all repairs up to $500. So if it breaks and you're the property manager, you don't have to call the owner, just go fix it. If it's $499, just go fix it. If it's $501, now you got to call your owner and discuss it with them. Why does universal exist if we don't use it? Because it is a relationship, but we're talking specifically about agency relationships. It is a relationship. So the property manager, and again, it's got to be spelled out in our property management agreement. We got a whole unit dedicated to property management, so we'll talk more about this in Unit 12. The other example we have as a general agent is the individual broker's relationship with their firm. The individual broker is coming into the firm. They're affiliated with the firm. That word does not say employed or hired. We affiliate with firms. Brokers, most often, sales agents, most often are independent contractors. As an independent contractor, who do you work for? You work for you. So if you come home today complaining about your boss, you need to be looking in the mirror, right? We affiliate with firms. We don't hire. We affiliate with firms. And we do so using some kind of employing or independent contractor agreement, some kind of agreement between us and the firm. Because we're a general agent of the firm, we have the ability to make some decisions on behalf of our firm. Again, what kind of decisions or how much? That will come when you affiliate with your firm. That will come when your firm is bringing you on. I'm going to talk about the independent contractor. We're going to compare the independent contractor to the W-2 employee. We will talk more about that later. When we get into our agency agreements in Unit 8, we're going to see that the broker, most of the times, can sign the agency agreement on behalf of the firm. The firm is an entity. They're not a body that can sign it. They need somebody that can sign it. The reason we can sign those agency agreements on behalf of our firm is because we are a general agent. We have some power. So if Universal has all the power, General has some of the power, without looking, how much do you think the next classification of agency has? Zip, zero, zilch. And that is our special agent. The special agent is the sales agent. The special agent is the one that's working with buyers and sellers. May that be residential or commercial. Whenever you're working with buyers and sellers, we're special. And how much power do I have? None. Remember, you guys, we are fact finders. I provide the information for who to make the informed decision for them. I can't bind them. I only speak on their behalf. I can't make decisions for them. I only provide my advice, my facts, my opinions. I can tell them whatever I want to, but ultimately the decision is theirs. So 3 levels, we can better remember these maybe is full, some, or none. The universal has a full tank. The general's got a half tank, and the special had better get to the BP because they got no gas. Questions on these classifications of agency?
In the book, it say special agents is authorized to represent the principal in only one specific act.
So that specific act is what I'm being hired to do. The listing agreement hires me to list and sell your home. The buyer's agency agreement hires me to help you select and purchase a property. That's my act.
Okay.
The agency agreements are very specific. So in other words, if somebody hires you to list and sell their home, it's not like they can tell you to go out and run their errands and go to the grocery store. They're not hiring you to do anything but list, market, and sell their home. That's my act.
So only one job.
Per the agency agreement, correct.
Okay.
And even then, did you hear me? List, market, and sell. Does that mean I can accept an offer on my seller's behalf? Does that mean I can submit an offer on my buyer's behalf without running it by them first, right? So even then, I'm not really leading. I'm like side by side with them through this transaction. Again, you guys, these tend to be problem topics. So I suggest highlighting it, circling it after class when you're reviewing. Make this into a flashcard. You can do 1 flashcard for all 3. You can do 3 for all 3, whichever. Okay. Bottom page 149, we define some more words. Brokerage is just the business of bringing buyers and sellers together in the marketplace. When I brokerage a transaction, when I brokerage a deal, I'm connecting buyer and seller. Broker is the individual broker, the individual agent. In North Carolina, we're all brokers. North Carolina is a brokerage state. Some states or other states let you start first as a sales associate, get some experience, and then have to go back to school to become a broker. North Carolina skips that whole sales associate mess, and we go straight to broker. The entry-level status is the provisional broker. We'll talk more about the statuses. Right now, we're just saying in North Carolina, every single one of us is a broker. Commission is what we get paid when we've done our job. When we get into our agency agreements, we're going to learn that there's a difference. And when we earn our commission versus when we actually get paid. We earn our commission when we connect buyer and seller. We don't get paid until it closes. What happens if it doesn't close? Then we don't get paid. More on that. And then the cooperating broker is anybody within our MLS, but not in our firm. We're in the same multiple listing services. There's Triad, Triangle, Charlotte's is called Canopy. There's lots of MLSs all over the state. So we're in the same MLS, but we're with a different firm and we're cooperating, we're working together for this one transaction. Compare a cooperating broker to an in-house transaction. An in-house transaction means both buyer and seller are represented by the same firm. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. So cooperating brokers is when you have two firms working together, one with the seller, one with the buyer, who are working together. In-house means we both come from the same firm. More on that when our agency agreement or types in just a minute.
Cooperating brokers, that would be like the most common, right?
I would say so, Cynthia. I mean, we do a lot in-house, but I think if I were to pull a report, I'd say the majority of it is a cooperating. So you got firm ABC and firm XYZ, and we're coming together. We're different firms, we're conflicting firms, we're each out for our own business, but now we're working together for this one transaction. And I would agree. I'd say that's what we see the most often. So some words, basic understanding of words. Any questions so far? All right, first break. Let's take 10. We come back, we're going to pick back up. Keep going in unit 7. Welcome back. Cameras are coming back on. And I can see you. So I'm going to take attendance. All right, we've defined some words. Oh my. I'm sorry. Moving right along. North Carolina, there are certain activities that are required to have a license. So you don't necessarily need a license. However, if you're going to engage in any of these activities, list, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, or sell real property for others for compensation. The activities we can think of by remembering LLBs. List, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, sell. I have taken attendance, so let me know you're back in the chat, please. Real property for others for compensation. I like to think of a funnel. When we talk about the activities, the transfer, exchange of real property for others for compensation. And the thing we need to understand is to have a license in the state or to require a license in the state, all three activities have to be present. So for example, if you are selling property that you own, you are the owner of record. You're not doing it for others, are you? You're now doing it for yourself. So does the for sale by owner need to have a real estate license? No, because we have to have all three activities present. And I've taken attendance, so please make sure you tell me you're back. Shauna, I got you. What if you, and when we say compensation, I need you guys to make a note. When we're talking about compensation, I know we think of money, but we really need to think of anything of value. So I can perform these activities in exchange for money. What if I am doing something in exchange for a free week at your mountain house? Is that something you can put value on? Is that something worth something? So it's not just money, you guys. When we say compensation, what we really need to think is anything of value, anything in exchange for value. I mean, shoot, free lunch. That's got a price tag, especially these days, right? Anything of value. So all three of these activities are required to have a license. If any one of them is missing, then a license is not required. When we talk about a fee, in exchange for money or a fee, that does also refer to referral fee or finder's fee. Some people call it a bird dog fee. So for a referral fee, I'm recommending services. I'm letting you handle. And as a licensee, because I have a license, you can offer me a referral fee. But if I don't have a license, I can't accept a referral fee. So any form of compensation, any form of money. There was we've mentioned this just briefly, but there was around the end of the pandemic, when we were starting to get whatever normal means, when we were seeing the end of that, I mean, real estate was tight. It was tough that time. The market was tough. It was an extreme seller's market, and buyers were having a hard time buying. I mean, properties were on the market for like a couple hours before they went under contract. Our average days on market was like 4. So it was incredibly competitive, we had low inventory and lower interest rates. So the two of those together made for this market that wasn't easy to navigate. And what we saw a lot come out of that, well, not a lot, but some come out of that, where agents were advertising their services to buyers specifically. And they were saying, buyers, if you hire me, I will give you some of my commission. I'll give you a percentage of my commission. This is where we were, you guys. This was the kind of market it was in. I'm not seeing this much anymore. But some agents were offering that service. Can I give my buyer, can I give my client, legally give my client some of my commission? Sure. Because again, they're not doing it. We're not doing it for others. We're doing it for them. We're doing it for themselves. Again, I'm not seeing it much anymore, but it brought up a really good point. What kind of business was the agents getting? I don't know. We weren't doing that. But they were trying to find a stick. They were trying to find an angle. It was tough. We're in a much more relaxed market. We're still in a seller's market. Don't get me wrong. But it's a much more relaxed seller's market. More, here's that word, normal, whatever that means. So understanding the activities, the funnel, and the big thing here is that if any one of these activities in the funnel is missing, then a license isn't required. So the for sale by owner, the for rent by owner. If you want to help your sister buy a house in exchange for absolutely nothing, nothing at all, you can do it without a license. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. Everybody with me? All three activities have to be present. Talking just a little bit about the creation of agency relationships. We've already said this a couple times. Agency agreements are what is the employment agreement that creates agency between the firm and the client. Make sure you note that word, firm. So our agency agreements, we're getting more and more into those as we get into Unit 8. We also have relationships between ourselves and other firms or ourselves and other agents. So there's an in-house brokerage employment contract. This is your relationship. This is your agreement with your firm. So once you affiliate with a firm, then they will have you sign an in-house brokerage agreement. May also be called an independent contractor agreement. The firm can kind of stipulate your duties, your actions. They're all different. And when we have this discussion in a few weeks, one thing you're going to hear me say, when you guys get licensed and you start looking around for brokers, for firms to affiliate with, I recommend you talk to 2, maybe even 3, because, and this is important, all firms are different. They all have a different arrangement, a different agreement, different compensation style, different training. They're all different. And if you only talk to one, you have nothing to compare it to. So the recommendation is you kind of shop around, talk to a couple, compare, contrast, side by side. So you can best affiliate with the firm that best fits with you. Also between brokers and firms is the cooperation agreement. Now, we mentioned the NAR settlement on the first day, and I hope I stressed that we are not going to be tested on the NAR settlement stuff because NAR doesn't give us our license. So we're not doing much with NAR, but it is going to pop up a little bit because it is very real now. It's taken in effect. Prior to August, we would list our cooperation in MLS. So if I had a listing, I would advertise to buyers agents. When you bring me a buyer, this is how much I'm going to pay you. A percentage usually. Post the settlement, we still have a cooperation agreement, but we can no longer advertise it in an MLS. Now we have an actual form called Cooperation Compensation Agreement. What we need to understand, you're not going to be tested on NAR. There is still a cooperation agreement, and it's an actual form now that the listing firm and the selling firm, the one working with the buyer, use if the seller is willing to pay the buyer's agent's commission, the buyer's firm commission. So cooperation agreement, how much, if any, am I going to pay you when you bring me a buyer? And then another agency relationship could be created by the conduct of the parties. Remember, we talked about express versus implied. We're going to see this again. Implied says you just start acting like an agent. You just start acting like you have an agency relationship. Implied agency is never allowed. In North Carolina, we always do express, meaning the terms have been clearly stated. We just can't start acting. We can't do this implied. So I think it's important that we understand there's several different types of agency relationships. The firm and their client, the broker and the firm, the two firms coming together, cooperating. All of these are agency relationships. Document, document, document. They all have paperwork involved. So document, document. Then we talk about our scope of authority. How do I know what I'm allowed to do? Well, this kind of piggybacks off the classification of agency, but that doesn't tell us a whole lot, right? Full power, some power, no power. What the heck does that mean? So when we get into the scope, our authority needs to be an express agreement. Again, it's express because the terms have been clearly stated. Maybe they have been stated orally, maybe they've been stated in writing. I don't care about the second bullet point. What we need to care about is it's expressed because the terms have been clearly stated. This is the only way we can address our authority. This is the only way that we can have an agency agreement is express. Compare that to implied. Just based on our actions, again, that scope of authority is not allowed in North Carolina. Implied anything is not allowed in North Carolina. Everything that we do is express. So when we look at our agency agreements, we're going to see it's very detailed about what I am doing for you, about what I am doing for the client. There's no guessing. There's no what ifs. It's pretty clear what our authority is. We'll see that in 8. The last scope of authority then is something called apparent authority. This would be a situation between a principal and a broker. So the principal knows my scope of authority. They know what I can and can't do. But they look at me and say, just do a little bit more for me. Just go above and beyond for me. They're trying to give me authority that I don't have. For example, and I need you guys to remind me, which offers do I present to my sellers? I see Maz move coming in chat. Some of y'all are yelling at me. I love it. Which ones do I present to my sellers? All of them. That's my authority. That's what the real estate commission says. I have a duty, commission rule says I have a duty to present all offers to my sellers. So let's say I have a listing. My seller knows this. We've had this conversation. Maybe my seller says I can't accept anything under X amount. I appreciate you telling me that. Should an offer come in under X amount, I still have a duty to present it to you. It's a short conversation, but I can't reject that offer on their behalf. Everybody with me so far? So we've had this conversation with our sellers. They understand my authority. But now my seller's going on a 5-day cruise without Wi-Fi access. They're going to go off the grid for 5 days. And they say, I know you have to present all offers, but we're going to be gone for 5 days. So if anything comes in for X amount, just go ahead and accept it on my behalf. We'll be okay with that. Can I do that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's apparent authority. That's them expecting me to go above and beyond what I'm allowed to do. So what do? Well, maybe they have a family member at home that they trust. If they don't, maybe we just need to take their home off the market for 5 days while they're gone. If I can't get a response from them, I can't sell their house. Does that make sense? And that's what that apparent authority is. Briefly about your commission. Again, we're really getting into commission in Unit 8. But while we're defining and understanding agency, it's important that we understand out the gate. My loyalty is to the one that hires me. My loyalty is to the one that enters into an agency agreement with me. They may or may not be the one paying me. Who's paying me has nothing to do with my loyalty. Who gets Old Car? The client. The client's the one that enters into an agency agreement with me. So let's say, for example, you're working with a buyer and your buyer comes across a for sale by owner. For sale by owners are unrepresented. They didn't hire an agency. They didn't hire a broker. They're going it alone. Respect that. So my buyer becomes interested in this for sale by owner. And I call the for sale by owner to talk to him, to ask him my buyer's questions, to schedule a showing. And at some point, I'm going to ask the for sale by owner, are you willing to cooperate with me? Are you willing to pay me? And maybe the for sale by owner says yes, maybe they say no, completely up to them. If they say yes, we're going to pay you, it's important that we understand that my loyalty is to my buyer, because my buyer is the one that hired me. The FSBO is just cutting a check, y'all. So how do I know who I'm loyal to? Anytime we have question about my agency and who I represent and who gets Old Car, always look up towards the firm. If the firm has entered into an agency agreement, that's where my loyalty is. And the only way we can get you guys paid, the only way we can get the firm paid, is if we have a written agency agreement. So more on that. We're kind of dancing all around it, I know. But more on that, Unit 8, deeper dive into our agency agreement. At some point, agency has to end. Now, I didn't recreate the wheel here. So if you look with me in your books on page 152, it gives us a list of things that terminate agency, of things that will end our agency relationship. We're not committed to each other for a lifetime. So on page 152, termination of agency. What ends agency? Completion or fulfillment of the purpose. Remember, in an agency agreement, I've been hired to do a job. And once I've done that job, agency's over. My job is to help you list, market, and sell your home. Once you've sold it, we're done. I've done my job. If my job is to help you locate and purchase a home, once you've bought, we're done. So completion, fulfillment of the purpose will end agency. Expiration of the terms. We will learn that all agency agreements have a definite end date. You do not have an open-ended agency agreement. We agree to be an agency until, pick a date. And when that date comes, agency is over. We're done. Can we agree to extend it? Sure. Do we have to? No. We agree going into this the length, and y'all, our agency agreement says 11:59 p.m. on this date. It's pretty dang specific. So expiration of the terms, mutual agreement to terminate. The firm and the client agree to enter into agency together. Guess what? They can agree to get out. They can mutually agree to release themselves. By the way, if we're mutually agreeing to get out, are you releasing them? You, the individual agent, releasing them? No, because the agency relationship isn't with you. Always remember that. It's with the firm. So if we're getting out, now your broker in charge is involved. Breach by either party. So if agent doesn't do what they promised to do, if principal doesn't do what they promised to do, both parties could be in breach. Destruction or condemnation of the property. So if the house that I have listed for sale burns down, I don't have a product to sell anymore. If the tree falls on it, does that make sense? I don't have a product to sell anymore. Maybe we enter into a different agency agreement to sell the land. But as it stands, destruction or condemnation of the property may end the agency agreement. And then death or incapacity of either party, remembering the relationship is with the firm. So if the individual broker passes away, or the individual broker's license goes inactive or expired, the show goes on because the firm is still standing. In order for the firm to die, they'll have to shut their doors. Now, talking about termination of agency, I got a few slides where I'm going off book. So I'm pulling from the syllabus so we can continue, have an understanding of this conversation. When our agency is over, when agency is terminated, there are a couple exceptions. If I have any unfulfilled promise and our agency ends, I still need to do what I promised to do. Don't make any broken promises. If you tell somebody you're going to do it, do it. If our agency agreement ends when the contract is under contract, or excuse me, when the transaction is under contract, it's expected that we're going to continue our agency duties through closing. Best practice would be to get an agency agreement extension to get us through closing. Not required, just a best practice. Once our agency agreement is over, I can't use the knowledge that I learned about my clients to benefit myself. Y'all, we learn a whole lot of stuff about our buyers and sellers. And that doesn't mean when agency is over, we have the right to take advantage of them, to take advantage of that situation. I know for a fact how low this seller was willing to go. When we finish agency, I can't use that to better myself. That's not fair to them. Even though we're not an agency anymore, I still come into this with a higher level of understanding. Remember, I'm the professional in this situation, and we need to conduct ourselves as such, even after agency is over. It's a small world, y'all. And I don't know how, but buyers and sellers know each other. They all, I'm just kidding. But seriously, it's a small world. News like that doesn't take much to spread. The other thing that comes up with termination of agency is that duty of confidentiality. Even though agency is over, I'm still going to respect their confidentiality. It's not like if our agency ended last night, y'all going to catch me running up down the streets going, they have to sell, job transfer, new baby coming, they have to sell fast. We're still going to maintain that duty of confidentiality. The exception to this, let's say, for example, I had a listing for sale, and we were on the market for 4 months. I'm making numbers up. We were on the market for 4 months, and I didn't sell it within those 4 months. Our agency agreement expired. That seller chose to list with another firm. They went back on the market with a new firm. In the meantime, I picked up a buyer client, and my buyer client becomes interested in my previous listing. The question you need to ask yourselves, who do I represent today? Who gets old car today? And in that case, it would be the buyer. In that case, I owe it to them to tell them what I know about the seller. Yesterday, the seller was my client. Today, the seller is my customer. I tell my client everything about my customer. I tell my customer nothing about my client. What do we feel about this? How do we think about this? I think if we get the old car piece of it, it may kind of bump on our moral compasses a little bit. But again, at any time, if you're not sure how to proceed, you got to ask yourself, who has the agency agreement with me today? Not yesterday, today. And that's who gets that old car. That's who gets that confidentiality. Questions on this? Would be a conflict in any way? No, because again, yesterday that seller was my client, but today that seller is my customer. Now let's expand on that for a second. When the offer comes in, let's say my buyer wants to make an offer on this property that I had listed previously. When the offer comes in, my name's on it. So the sellers can look at that. Could they decide not to accept this offer because my name's on it? Like, my God, there's that Julie chick again. I thought we were done with her. So the seller still has a decision to make. I'm not hiding the fact that I'm representing the buyer. Our contracts has to spell that out. That's correct, Kiana. So the contract has to spell that out. And the seller looks at that and they say, well, you know, there's this Julie girl and she knew how low we were willing to go. She knew this, she knew that. She knew all this stuff. Do they have to accept my buyer's offer? No. So there's that. And that is a really good point for the new firm. It's going, oh my gosh, this chick knows so much about me. You know, it's going to depend on the seller. If you're in a multiple offer situation, you don't need me. But what if I'm the first offer you saw come through in like 3 months? They may have a decision to make here, right? But I'm not having that conversation with the sellers. That's up to their agent. That's up to their new firm. Anything else on this? Y'all still have your chats set to private? Go ahead and do that because I got a question for you guys. Private chats. Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Everybody in? So let's see, the fiduciary obligation to the agent are owed to. When we see that word fiduciary, what does that tell us? Yep, that fiduciary tells us that this is a relationship of trust. The principal, the client, is the one that gets that fiduciary. They should trust when I go into this, when they come into this with me, they should trust that I have their best interest. So fiduciary goes to the principal. Write that down. When you see fiduciary, we're referring to the principal, we're referring to the client. So the fiduciary obligations to the agent are owed to the one that employs me. How do you become my principal or my client? You hire me, and you do so through the use of a written agency agreement. The one that pays me may or may not be my fiduciary. All parties involved in a transaction, maybe. We're going to talk about that scenario. And then just because they reach out to the firm, that's step one. We have a ways to go. So that fiduciary is the principal. The principal is the one that hires us through the use of a written agency agreement. Questions? So we're on page 152. And we're going to start talking about the different types of agency relationships. Remember what we just said a few minutes ago. All firms are different. And as long as they're operating under license law and commission rule, they can set themselves up, they conduct themselves in any way, including choosing what types of agency relationships they want to practice. As we go through these, understand some firms choose to operate this way, some firms choose to operate in another form of agency relationships, but this just gives them the idea, it kind of gives them the basis of how they want to work. So to get into this section, I'd like to introduce you to what I call my cast of characters. So we have the firm, which I'm going to be the BIC. So I am Julie's Real Estate Shop. Guess what? All y'all are licensed and you're affiliated with me. Welcome aboard. Excited to have you guys. One of you is going to act as my listing agent. Another one of you is going to act as my selling agent. Remember our ings. If you're working with the listing, you're working with the seller. If you're selling, you're working with the buyer. Then we have buyers and sellers. And then we have another firm. I don't care what firm. All I care about is it's not Julie's Real Estate Shop. So when we talk about the firm, who do we care about? All we care about is us, Julie's Real Estate Shop. Everybody with me? Also, a quick reminder, if we talk about somebody being represented, that means they've hired your firm. If they're unrepresented, they're not hired by Julie's Real Estate Shop. Maybe they're hired by another firm. Maybe they're not. What do we care about? Whether or not Julie's Real Estate Shop. So represented, hired by Julie's Real Estate Shop, unrepresented is not. Also, you've heard me say it, but just so we have it in writing, we're going to talk about the FSBO, that for sale by owner, going it alone, unrepresented. They hired no firm. They didn't hire Julie's Real Estate Shop. They didn't hire anybody. They're going it alone. You have a nice summary of the agency relationships on page 153. Not enough, but it's a nice little summary to help get us started. So we're going to go through and talk about the different ways the firm can choose to work, the different ways that the firms can choose to interact or practice agency, I should say. And as you guys are interviewing firms, some of these may be more important to you than others. And if we come across an agency relationship that you don't care for, you don't like, then don't affiliate with that firm. This is why we have you talking to a couple different firms. Again, and please hear me, they're all different. They are all different. The only way for you to know what's the best match for you is to talk to a couple. Everybody with me so far? Thumbs ups, head bobs. I'm telling you, I'm drinking the heck out of this coffee this morning. I'm going to be bouncing off the walls in just a second. I got to get up there with Kiana. Woo! All right. So, so our different types of agency relationships, the different ways that firms can choose to work. First off, we have single agency, and there's a couple different types of single agency. Single tells us how many? Just one. Some firms choose to act as a single agent. So you may come across a firm that only represents sellers. The only people we're going to enter into an agency agreement with are sellers. So for the firm, the buyers are customers. It's an exclusive relationship with sellers only. So basically what I'm saying is, as long as you're my seller, you're my client, I'll put you in first class. When you sell that house and now you want to buy, I've just downgraded you to coach. I can't put you in first class because we are a single agent firm. So if we look at our cast of characters again, you got Julie's Real Estate Shop on the right. We're representing the seller. One of you gets to be my listing agent, working directly with the seller. All of us got your back. And then the buyers over there on the left, maybe they are unrepresented and they're standing alone. Maybe they're represented by a different firm. Doesn't matter. What matters is they are not represented by Julie's Real Estate Shop. Julie's Real Estate Shop will only represent sellers. Flip that coin. If you have firms that only work with sellers, you could also have firms that only work with buyers. The only agency relationship we have are with buyers. So the only properties I can show you, they're not going to be my listings. I don't take listings. I don't work with sellers. So when I'm out showing property, I'm showing you properties that are listed by another firm or for sale by owner. Single agency means we're only representing one. So again, as long as you're my buyer, I got you in first class. You're my client. Fast forward and you want to sell your home, I can't help you. I can refer you to an agency down the street, but I can't and I won't help you because my firm was not set up to represent sellers, only buyers. So you got Julie's Real Estate Shop on the left now. One of you will be my selling agent, working directly with the buyer. The rest of us got your back. And the seller's over there. They're either over there by themselves as a for sale by owner, or they are represented by a different firm. Doesn't matter. What matters is that they are not represented by Julie's Real Estate Shop. You could also come across firms, single agent firm. We're still a single agent firm, but now they're working with both, but only one per transaction. I work with sellers and I work with buyers, but never both in the same transaction. Our single agency is sellers or buyers. We will talk in just a minute about what happens when we work with both in the same transaction. This is working with one or the other. So basically the first one here wins. Seller hires me to list their home. A buyer calls interested in my listing. I can assist them, but it would be as a customer. They would not be my client. If that buyer wants representation, they need to go to a different firm. What if I'm working with a buyer? We're out looking at properties. We've been together for a couple weeks, and my firm lists a new property that my buyer is interested in. I cannot help them. And by the way, we're going to talk about disclosure in just a bit. If we're doing it right, buyers and sellers know going into this. We're not trying to make surprises. We're not trying to keep secrets. So going into this, we're going to disclose my agency relationship with buyers and sellers. We will talk more about that. So there should be no surprises here. So if we look at our pictures, we work with the seller. Julie's Real Estate Shop represents the seller. Maybe the buyer's unrepresented. Maybe they come with a different firm. Doesn't matter. What matters is that how many people is Julie's Real Estate Shop representing? Just one. In this case, the buyer. Or Julie's Real Estate Shop could represent the buyer. Seller's either represented by another firm or for sale by owner. This is about the time of the class I get the why question. Why would a firm do this? And I'll be honest, your bigger markets, Triad, Triangle, Charlotte, you don't see that this much. But you get into our smaller markets, our more boutique markets, you're more apt to come across this. And it's just because it's the niche that they tried to do, the niche that they tried to set up. Why do they set up the way they do? Oh. These are their options. Could you imagine how boring life would be if we all operated the same? These are their options. Questions on the single agency.
So basically, like the single agency, right, can either be a buyer. Wait, I'm getting confused. So it can either be a buyer with everything and then the seller with everything, basically.
Or
Okay.
one
Okay.
or the other. Yep.
Okay.
Another type of an agency relationship is called a subagency. Subagency takes on two different forms. So we're going to break these down. Subagency, that prefix sub tells us under. Think of like submarine, right? So that prefix sub tells us under. So if you're in subagency, if your agency relationship is subagency, then you're an agent of an agent. And the first form of subagency says, remember Julie's Real Estate Shop, and we're all affiliated with Julie's Real Estate Shop. And what this first form of subagency says, when one of us gets a listing, in a sense, we all get a listing because you guys are agents of me. You are agents of Julie's Real Estate Shop. So when one of you gets a listing, good job. The rest of us, in a sense, get a listing as well because it's my listing. It's the firm's listing. So if my individual listing agent leaves, goes to another firm, loses their license, passes away, does that terminate our agency relationship? No, because the agency relationship isn't with the individual agent. Who is the agency relationship with? Me, Julie's Real Estate Firm. So if something happens to one of you, the show goes on. I'll just pluck somebody out of the crowd and let somebody else continue on being my listing agent. We all owe this duty to my seller. or my buyer. Now, you're the listing agent. Let me see. Let me pick on somebody. I'm going to look up and I'm going to see Rashawn. Hey, Rashawn. So I'm going to let you be my listing agent. Does that mean I'm going to let Rashawn boss y'all around? Rashawn's going to say, make me copies and do my open house and sell this house for me. No, y'all don't listen to Rashawn. Listen to me, right? Thank you, Rashawn, for letting me pick on you. So Rashawn is the listing agent, but everybody is under the firm. Could we all help Rashawn? Could we help Rashawn do an open house, or could we help Rashawn sell this? Sure. Are we under any obligation to? No, because Rashawn is the one that I allow to work with my seller in this transaction. Any one of you could do the open house for him on Sunday because the agency relationship is with the firm. When Rashawn sells this listing, whose commission check is it? Who gets the commission? Not yet, Rashawn. Who gets it first? Me, because the relationship is with me. So they pay me, and then I pay Rashawn for selling the property. How much am I going to pay him? That's our compensation agreement that can vary from firm to firm. Remember, they're all different. It's the firm's commission, it's the firm's seller, it's the firm's listing. I allow Rashawn to work with my seller. If Rashawn goes somewhere else, then I'm going to pluck out somebody else. Rashawn will miss you, but I got to keep the show going, right? My seller still has a duty and obligation to sell. Does that make sense? That's what it means to be a sub-agent. In a sense, we are all in this together. So an agent of an agent. Question, this is the first form. This is every day, you guys. Same thing with buyers. Once one of us gets a buyer client, guess what? We all get a buyer client because it's not yours. You are agents of me. You are sub-agents. You are agents of me. Questions on the first form of sub-agency? Before we get into the second form of agency, I think we need a break. I don't want to start something and then not be able to finish it. So that's your cliffhanger. What's the second form of agency? Stay tuned. Come back in 10 and we'll spell that out. Welcome back. Cameras are coming back and I can see you. I'm going to take attendance. All right. First way sub agency can work. When one of us gets a buyer, guess what? We all get a buyer. When one of us gets a seller, guess what? We all get the seller, because the relationship is between, thank you, better safe than sorry, right? Because the relationship is between the client and the firm. Everybody with me? Everybody good so far? So one of us got a listing. We all have a listing. Only one of you is going to get paid. Only one of you is going to do the work. But we're all in this together. So if you're going to show, let's say you have a buyer. You have a buyer client. And they become interested in Rashawn's listing. We're all within the same firm now. That's that in-house transaction. And we will talk about that relationship in just a second. The other way that sub-agency can work. Let's just back up for 1 second. When I wake up every morning and I log into the Triad MLS, because I am a member of the Triad MLS, I owe all the sellers in the Triad MLS the duty of bringing them this ready, willing, and able buyer. That's my job, is to find all these sellers in the MLS. Maybe they're represented by my firm, maybe they're not. But my job is to brokerage the deal, is to connect the buyers and the sellers. So every single morning I wake up, my duty is to the seller, whether they're with my firm or not. And my job is to find them this ready, willing, and able buyer. That continues until I enter into a buyer agency agreement with a buyer. Now, when I wake up every morning, my duty is to the buyer. That's who's in the agency agreement with me. Everybody else, my job is to find them this ready, willing, and able buyer. When we think of ready, willing, and able buyer, this is verbiage we're going to kind of start seeing again and again. When we think of this ready, willing, and able buyer, I really need us to think of a three-legged stool. If you have a three-legged stool, if one of those legs gets kicked out, what happens to the stool? Falls down. It doesn't stand up, right? Same thing with our ready, willing, and able buyer. If I don't have one of those three pieces, then I can't brokerage the deal. You may have buyers that want to buy, but they can't afford to. Does that mean they're able? No, which means I don't have anything. I don't have that duty. So this idea of a ready, willing, and able buyer is my three-legged stool. This second form of sub-agency says, with my duty owed to the principal, to the seller, as a seller sub-agent, I'm not bringing them a buyer client. If they're a buyer client, then they're represented by the firm. As a seller sub-agent, I am bringing an unrepresented buyer. I am bringing a buyer customer. Maybe I am bringing them to one of my sellers. Maybe I am bringing them to a seller of a different firm. What matters, the important thing to understand in seller sub-agency is that the buyer is the customer. Please write that down. The buyer is unrepresented. In my plane, this buyer is in coach. What do I owe my customers? Let's rattle that off together. What do I owe my customers? Honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. This buyer, for whatever reason, chose not to hire the firm. As an unrepresented buyer, I can still assist them through the transaction if the seller and the listing firm allow it. More on that in just a second. So the buyer's the customer. Why, first off, why would they not hire the firm? Well, maybe, here's all the what ifs, maybe this buyer is an investor that buys 5 to 10 properties a year. They don't need me. They need access to my forms. They need access to my MLS. They don't need to know how to negotiate or how to write an offer. This is what they do for a living. They don't need me. They don't need to be represented. I'll be honest with you guys. I think sometimes why buyers choose not to hire the firm, I think it's our presentation. I think a lot of brokers don't sell themselves as a buyer's agent. And if I don't do a good job selling myself, that buyer doesn't trust. That buyer has hesitation of entering into an agency relationship with me. There could be several reasons why the buyer doesn't hire the firm. As a seller sub-agent, I'm bringing the buyer customer. And again, and this is important, maybe we're within the same firm. Maybe I'm coming from a different firm. What matters here is that the buyer's my customer. So in seller sub-agency, whose side am I on? In seller sub-agency, whose side am I on? I'm on the seller side. Now, they didn't hire me. They allowed me to hang out over here with them. We'll see that picture in just a second. The question on your mind right now is, am I going to get paid? I hear you. I hear you. That's an important question. As a seller sub-agent, can I get paid? And the answer to that is, it depends. In order to bring an unrepresented buyer to the transaction, the seller and the listing firm have to allow it. And this is spelled out in our listing agreement, whether or not we will cooperate with other buyer clients or unrepresented buyers. And I'll tell you right now, the biggest reason why the firm or the seller may not allow this is something called vicarious liability. We know, we've heard the saying, living vicariously through somebody. It means you kind of live through their eyes, you walk in their shoes, you have that same, very similar right here. As a seller sub-agent, I'm allowed to hang out on the same side as the seller, which means the seller and the listing firm could be responsible for my actions, or more importantly, my misconduct. If this seller sub-agent is coming from another firm, I don't know you. I don't know what kind of training you've had. I don't know if you're a decent, ethical person. I may choose, my firm may choose, or my seller may choose not to allow them to hang out over here with us. However, if we do allow them to hang out over here with us, then we will pay you. That's what it means to be a seller sub-agent. So let's look at some pictures. I got Julie's Real Estate Shop. One of you is my listing agent, working hand in hand with our seller. And then within Julie's Real Estate Shop, we have another one of you, a different one of you, that is working with the buyer customer. You see how they're hanging out over here all by themselves? They're going it alone. They're going unrepresented. For whatever reason, they chose not to hire us. And that's fine. They don't have to. They chose to go it alone. So your seller sub-agent could be either with Julie's Real Estate Shop, or your seller sub-agent could be an agent with a different firm that we allowed to hang out over here. And once we allow this, especially with the different firm, once we allow this, who are they under? They're under the firm, they're under the seller. And any misconduct, that vicarious liability, any misconduct of the seller sub-agent with a different firm, the firm and or the seller could be held liable. I'm not going to lie. Most of the time, seller sub-agency looks like this. We are representing the seller, and we also bring the unrepresented buyer. This is what we see out in the wild the most. Need to understand, we could allow an agent with a different firm to bring their buyer customer. Please write that down for me. Seller sub-agent means you're bringing the buyer customer. So this agent with the different firm was not hired by the seller. The seller hired Julie's Real Estate Shop. But because we allowed you to hang out over here with us, we are now liable for you. We are now responsible for you. So your misconduct, your misaction, that's that vicarious liability. It could come back on us. And because I let you hang out over here, I'll pay you. I will pay you. If I don't let you hang out, you're not even allowed to show the property. I'm not going to let you in the front door with your unrepresented buyer. As a seller sub-agent, the only way to know if you're welcome, the only way to know if you can bring your buyer customer, this agent with the different firm needs to reach out to the listing agent, to Julie's Real Estate Shop, and say, can I bring my buyer customer? And my response is either yes or no. And it's all spelled out in the agency agreement, the listing agreement. What do we think? The second form of seller sub-agency takes a time or two with it. Trust me. What questions do we have now, though?
Miss Julie, what unit was it where, as far as like the seller, the buyer terminology? Because I keep like getting confused. Like,
We're still in unit 7. We're still in unit 7.
oh, so it's more meanings to like the seller and the buyer and the client.
Yep, we're on page 152 talking about the different types of agency relationships. This is a relationship that the firm may allow. Remember, we allowed single agency?
Yeah.
The firm may also allow sub-agency.
Okay.
And the terms, you guys, the beginning of unit 7 on page 134, there's your key terms for this unit. Not to talk about this NAR settlement, but because of this NAR settlement, there's a couple of things going on that we're not going to discuss because you're not going to be tested on. You'll get all that information once you get your license, I promised. But with this NAR settlement, I think if I had a crystal ball, I think we're going to start seeing more unrepresented buyers. I think we're going to start seeing this more and more out in the wild. We went for the longest time where it was rare. But I think we're going to start seeing more and more where you have agents bringing seller sub-agents with a different firm, somebody not with Julie's Real Estate Shop, bringing the unrepresented buyer. And again, if we back up, when we first met this buyer, we'll probably get a little bit today into our agency disclosure. When you're disclosing, you're telling people, right? So when we first meet people, we tell them, these are the different forms that my firm can work with. These are the different types of agency relationships that my firm practices. And if this buyer chooses not to hire us, before we ever start asking how many bed and bath do you need a garage, before we ever get there, we're having a conversation with the buyer. Look, you don't want to hire me, that's fine. You don't have to, that's fine. You don't want to hire me, you don't want to hire my firm. But you need to understand, as a seller sub-agent, I may not be able to show you all the properties available. I may not be able to show you all the properties out there. It's going to be a case by case, a listing by listing, and it becomes up to me to make sure that they will allow us in the front door. Because if they say no to seller subagency, then we're not going to waste our time showing. The seller has already said, we don't want your unrepresented buyer. And the buyer's got to understand this. And that might make them say, well, okay, I'll hire you. Where do I sign? But guys, I can't make anybody do anything. And bottom line, if they don't want to hire me, that's great. They just need to understand what that means. So as a seller subagent, this buyer is in Coach. What does this buyer get? Buyer customer? They get honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. Everything I do, once I'm allowed to hang out over here, everything I do as a seller subagent is because it's in the best interest of the seller. Is it in the seller's best interest that I assist this buyer in drafting up an offer and presenting the offer? Does the seller need an offer in order to sell it? Sure. If they ask me, well, what should I offer? How much should I offer? I'm going to say, well, asking price or higher. Because who am I hanging out here with? The seller. I cannot look at this unrepresented buyer and say, go in under asking price, because that's not what is in the best interest of the seller. I'm still assisting the buyer through the transaction. I want to get both under contract. I want them both to close. But everything I do is because it's in the best interest of the seller, because they allow me to hang out over here with them. The buyer chose not to hire me, and that's what that means. So when they look at me and say, should I ask for repairs? Do sellers want to do repairs? They want to fix anything? No. So when the buyer says, no, don't do repairs, because that's in the best interest of my seller. The seller didn't hire me, but the seller allowed me to hang out over here with them.
So is the seller subagent the same thing as cooperating brokers?
So in this case, we are, because we're with two different firms. We're cooperating together. In this scenario, this is an in-house transaction because we are both with Julie's Real Estate Shop. Great question. Thank you. So two forms of subagency. Yeah, did I hear something? No. Am I hearing things now? Great. So two forms of subagency. The first form says when one of us gets a listing, we all get a listing. When one of us gets a buyer, we all get a buyer. Because whose buyer is it? It's mine. I allow you to work with my buyer. And because all of you are an agent of me, you're an agent of an agent. And guys, we deal with that every single day, every single day. The second set of seller subagency is we are bringing the unrepresented buyer. That's the key. Please make sure you have that written down, circled real big. The buyer is the customer. The buyer is unrepresented. Anything else on subagency? Y'all please spend some time with this. Please promise me. Yes.
I was going to say, so what if the buyer is a representative buyer?
By my firm or by another firm?
Yours.
I'm getting there next.
Oh.
No, I don't think. I feel confident in saying the majority of the buyers want representation. I really do. And as long as we're selling ourselves, as long as we're pitching ourselves, that we sound like we know that we're talking about, y'all think about this. If you're trying to pitch yourself and you're fumbling all over it and you sound like you don't know what you're talking about, why is the buyer going to enter into an agency agreement with you? You know what I'm saying? Remember, we got to be the professional. And if you sound like you don't know what you're talking about, the buyer's going to pick up on that and they're not going to be willing to sign with you. I do think for the most part, we do a good job of pitching ourselves, of explaining. We're getting more into that disclosure. There could be so many reasons. Remember, people buy and sell houses all day, every day without the assistance of a real estate agent. Maybe this unrepresented buyer had a family member that had a terrible experience and now they're tainted. They're scared. They don't want to enter into an agent. Think of a reason. That doesn't matter. The why doesn't matter. What matters is they didn't hire us. So now my only option is to proceed as a seller subagent for these properties that allow me. If they say no, I can't continue with this showing. I can't continue with this property. And again, we're letting the buyer know going into this. You chose to go unrepresented, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, so you need to understand that we are limited. They're in coach versus first class. They get lesser service, don't they? We good? Put seller sub agency behind for now. No, we're going to review it later. I got thumbs ups, head bobs. Okay. Another type of agency relationship. Another way that a firm could practice agency if they choose is something called dual agency. The simplest breakdown of dual agency I can offer you. One firm, one transaction, two clients. Maybe dual agency is single dual agency where you only have one broker working with both buyer and seller. Maybe dual agency is two brokers, one working with the buyer, one working with the seller. In dual agency, everybody's in first class. Everybody's a client. The seller has hired Julie's Real Estate Shop and the buyer has hired Julie's Real Estate Shop. And so now we have this duty to serve both clients equally, fairly. And we're going to see in just a second when the firm enters into dual agency, we've got to take a few steps back. I cannot offer them full old car. More on that in just a second. I need to break this down. One firm, meaning this is an in-house transaction because we're all under the same firm. Now, you may have companies that have multiple locations. We're all still with the same firm. So if you affiliate with a firm that has an office in Winston and an office in Greensboro, you may not even know that agent in Greensboro, but we're all with the same firm. One transaction means the same property address. The seller is selling 123 Main Street. The buyer is hoping to buy 123 Main Street. Two clients tells us that both buyer and seller have hired the same firm. Everybody's in first class. Nobody is in coach. One thing you're going to hear me say over and over and over again, at some point I'm going to tell you to write it down, so you might as well go ahead and do it now. Dual agency is all about the firm. Dual agency is not what's best for buyers and sellers. Dual agency is what allows the firm to work with both parties in the same transaction, which, as I said, we have to take a few steps back. Dual agency is all about and only about the firm. This is what allows us to proceed. So dual agency is an in-house transaction, meaning one firm. Sellers represented by Julie's Real Estate Shop, and the buyers also represented by Julie's Real Estate Shop. We are an in-house transaction. This is the key for, well, one of the keys for dual agency. Dual agency is intentionally created with informed written consent of both parties. I don't ask you guys to write down much from the PowerPoints, but I think you should write down this second bullet point. And even when you read your notes later, treat it with a little red bouncing ball. Dual agency is intentionally created with informed written consent of both parties. I want you guys dreaming about that tonight. Intentionally created, meaning it's created with purpose, with a discussion, with a conversation. It doesn't just happen. We cannot go into dual agency without explaining what that means. And once we explain it, the parties have a choice. The parties don't have to agree to do dual. If they do allow dual, we have a place in both of our agency agreements that allow us to create that dual agency. I have a possible solution to dual agency in just a minute, so just bear with me. But we got to get an understanding of dual before we continue on. So I mentioned earlier, in dual agency, remember, dual agency is all about the firm. And in dual agency, the firm can't be a full advocate for both parties. We are literally splitting the wall, splitting the line, and offering both sides the same equality, the same loyalty, the same obedience. We are doing the same for both. And once the firm enters into dual agency, the firm has to take a few steps back, and I can no longer be an advocate for either party. Advocacy means you're getting support, you're getting advice from one person to help you make a decision. I can't be an advocate for either party. There is no answer to one question that won't harm the other party. For example, you're in a dual agency situation. You've had the showing. You got to get permission to do dual agency for the showing. I will talk more about that. Both parties, informed written consent, agree to allow dual agency. You show the buyer your firm's listing, and now the buyer wants to make an offer. And the first question out of their mouth is going to be, how much should I offer? Can I answer that without hurting anybody? If I look at my buyer and say, we'll offer under asking price, haven't I just harmed the firm's seller? Or if I look at the buyer and say, just offer asking price, I've now harmed the firm's buyer. There's no piece of advice. There's no advice I can offer that doesn't hurt the other side. So in dual agency, the firm and everybody in it has to take a few steps back. You're still in my plane. I'm still getting you through the transaction. I just can't be your full advocate. Now, there's a couple of things we can do. Have these conversations up front. You know, this is why we do bring back the buyer consultation, you guys. Before I ever show a property, let's sit down with a buyer and let them understand what's up. Oh, by the way, if you want to see something that my firm has listed, we got to get your permission and the seller's permission first. If you proceed, I can't be an advocate. Same thing on the listing side. If you agree to dual agency, then I got to take a few steps back. I can't be your full advocate. I will get you through the transaction. I'm still flying this plane, piloting us all from point A to point B. We're going to run a few scenarios in just a second, but I love the analogy of a football game. Saturday football's back, and college football's back. I know that's what you guys are doing on Saturdays. So college football is back. And even if you're not familiar with football, we've seen it, have a basic understanding. When you're watching a football game, you can clearly see that there are two teams on the field. Yes? You got somebody in their away whites and somebody else in their or home whites and somebody else in their away grays. If we were to take this football analogy and plop it into real estate, I got one team buying and I got another team selling. Prior to dual agency, the firm is acting as the coach. Prior to dual agency, the firm standing on the sideline, offer this, get a home inspection, right? Do repairs, right? We're off on the side shouting advice. Once we enter into dual agency, the firm's role changes. The buyer's still buying and the seller's still selling. They haven't changed. In dual agency, the firm's role changes. I can't be the coach. I can't shout advice to one party that won't harm the other. Now that we're in dual agency, the firm becomes the referee. Is the referee telling the quarterback what to do next? Is the referee telling each side what to do? Is the referee giving advice? No, they're just hanging out, making sure everybody plays by the rules. They're just hanging out, making sure we all get to the end of the transaction. So we got to take a few steps back. So let's run a few scenarios. You're at a listing appointment and you're talking with the seller, you're signing the listing agreement, and you get to the point of the listing agreement where we talk about dual agency. And you look at the seller and you say, dual agency is when my firm represents both you and the buyer in the same transaction. And in order for us to proceed as a dual agent, I have to have both parties written consent. I have to have both parties informed written consent. And so you look at the seller and you say, do you want to allow dual agency? They have two choices. They either say yes or no. If they say yes, perfect, we move on, talk about what's next. If they say no, I'm not doing dual agent. The whole reason I hired an agent was to have advocacy. And now you're telling me in this situation, you wouldn't. That's correct. The seller says, no, I'm not doing it. Is that their right? Can they say no? Sure, I can't make anybody do anything, right? So if they say no, that's fine. What the seller needs to understand, if they say no to dual agency, what they're saying no to is that none of us in the firm can bring our buyer client. So if the firm's bringing the buyer, it's an unrepresented buyer. If anybody else in the firm, and maybe we're a firm of 23, maybe we're a firm of 230. If any broker in the firm wants to show your listing, we can't allow it because you said no to dual agency. Seller may or may not, they may stick to their guns and say no. The other thing I need us to understand is that they can always change their minds later. So let's say you haven't had much interest in 4 or 5 months, and all of a sudden one of your peers calls you and says, my buyer wants to see your listing. Would it not be worth a phone call to the seller and say, we've been on the market, I have an interested buyer, but they're with our firm. So if you want to allow the showing, we got to get you to change your mind to dual agency. Understand, once they say yes or no, they're not locked in for life. They can always change their mind. We just may need to revisit with them. Flip that coin. You're working with a buyer. You're doing the buyer consultation. You're sitting down with your buyer, explaining the home buying process and all that good stuff. And you get to the point of the conversation about dual agency. And again, I can't be your advocate. I can get you through the transaction, but I can't give you the full advice that I could give you had we not been in dual agency. And the buyer says, no, I don't want it. Totally, they're right. Fast forward, we've been out a couple weeks, couple months showing properties. Now my firm lists something for sale. And my buyer calls me and says, ooh, I want to see that. With them saying no to dual agency where it stands right now, can I show it to them? No, because they said no to that relationship. Could I offer for them to change their mind? Yes. We're not set in stone. And let me tell you something, that's usually how it happens. They start by saying no until they realize they need that other person. They're more apt to change their mind. Kind of a general rule of thumb, just basic contract law. Once they put something in writing, the only way for them to change their minds is in writing. So they'd have to go back to our agency agreement and amend that to allow the show. If they say no, the sellers are limiting their pool of buyers. The buyers are limiting the listings that they can see. I got to have both people saying yes. I have to. Don't, I guess a common misconception is that dual agency does only happen in these large firms with 200, 500 plus agents. Some of them are big, y'all. And that dual agency only happens in there. Dual agency, all you need is one broker with one listing or one buyer. I always say dual agency is a phone call away, no matter how many agents are in your firm. If you're a one-man show and you have a listing, could a buyer drive by your listing, see your number on the sign, and call you and say, I'm interested in your listing and I want to be represented? It is one phone call away. It happens more the more agents you have, because the more agents you have, the more listings you have, the more buyers you have, right? So it does happen more, but all I need is one. That's all I need. Same thing, one buyer, and then all of a sudden I get a listing. Dual agency is a phone call away. So with dual agency, it's all about who? It's all about the firm. In dual agency, we represent both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction with equal loyalty. Remember that common law of agency was partially created on our relationship with the king in England back in the day. Now you got two kings. How does King One feel about this? Probably not too good, right? We have this duty to represent both with written permission of both parties and navigating through this without compromising either principle. Dual agency is intentionally created with informed written consent of both parties. If either party say no, I'm not doing dual, we can't proceed. We got to have both. And the important thing about this is the informed written consent, meaning we have to explain to them what this means. I'm going to hand them an agency agreement and say, look this over. Don't let the paperwork do your job for you. Use the paperwork to help you do your job, but it's still my duty to make sure that they understand what they are or are not agreeing to. I think a common misconception amongst consumers is that dual agency is about the individual agent. But you and I both know now that that's not who the relationship is with. And I think, especially as a buyer's agent, that's something that we need to help our buyers understand. I had buyers several years ago, and they were looking in Oak Ridge, Summerfield area, kind of north of Greensboro up there. They were looking in a very select market. Sellers, we have to have the conversation about dual agency up front. Because as soon as I put the property on the market, we need to know who's allowed to show it, who's not. So sellers, we have to have this conversation up front. Buyers, we may, kind of dance around it until it comes up. Does that make sense? Right? Like if they always want to see everything listed by somebody else, then we never have to talk about dual agency. I had buyers a few years ago, and we were talking about the different forms of agency, and I mentioned dual agency. And they said, no. We don't want to share you. That's the common thought out there. They don't want to share me. But that's what they don't understand. It's not about sharing me. It's about sharing the firm. I didn't really proceed with that conversation because at the time, my firm didn't have a listing in that area. So I knew it wasn't going to be a thing at that time. But what if my firm did list something in that area in Oak Ridge and they say, ooh, I want to buy? What if they changed where they were looking? What if they say, we're not finding anything in Oak Ridge, let's see what's in Kernersville, right? Things change, especially as you get out and start looking with buyers a little bit more. But with buyers, like I said, we mention it, of course, we talk about it, but the deep conversation doesn't need to come in until they want to see something that your firm has listed. Does that make sense? Don't scare them unnecessarily. But sellers, we have to have their yes or no before their listing goes online, before their listing goes active. Because showings sometimes start as soon as you hit submit, especially in that market a few years ago. Dual agency, intentionally created with informed written consent. What's not allowed is undisclosed dual agency. Undisclosed dual agent means you just start acting like a dual agent without getting their informed written consent. That's why that is so key. Informed written consent by both parties. There is a license law. General statute is license law, specifically 93A. General statute 93 is license law. 93A-6 answers the question, what can I get in trouble for? What can the real estate commission discipline my license? I've asked you guys to read Commission Rule 58A.0104. It's in the Julie folder. This is the only license law that I'm asking you guys to read, 93A-6. It's also in the Julie folder. If I can remember, I'll show you in just a second, but both are in the Julie folder. 93A-6 answers the question, what can the commission discipline my license for? And under 93A-6 is undisclosed dual agency. What do we document? Everything. So if this conversation is face-to-face or in person, do you think it's worth going home and typing up an email talking about per our conversation, this is what dual agency means? Guys, getting them to initial, we'll see the initial box in just a second. Getting them to initial is the easy part. It's making sure that they understand what it is they are initialing, what it is they are agreeing to. And that's the conversation we need to have documented. I don't want anybody to come back and look at y'all and say, well, my agent never explained that to me. But if you pound it out in an email, do they have it now? Do they have that explanation? Document every stinking thing. I'm telling you. So undisclosed dual agency, never, ever, ever allowed. What we're looking for is disclosed dual agency that's purposely created. It's created with intent, informed written consent. I always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. Whether you're working as a single agent, a sub-agent, or a dual agent, we always have a duty to disclose material facts. And you might be a single agent, dual agent. You might be one agent working with both. I'm still going to keep my party's confidential information confidential. Now that I'm in dual agency, it's not like I have a golden ticket to say, I know how low the Joneses are willing to go. I know how high the Smiths are willing to offer. Even though we're in dual, we're still going to keep our clients' confidential information confidential. You can talk about their confidential information with other brokers in your firm, because dual agency is about who? It's about the firm. We are not going to discuss confidential information with each other. So I got a few pictures. And then I do have a possible solution. I know that dual agency doesn't sit with us right. I mean, I meet you guys on the first day, and many of you tell me that you're here because you love looking at houses and you want to help people. Specifically, you want to help people achieve the American dream. And now I'm here babbling on about a time that you may not be able to be their full advocate. I'm going on and on about an opportunity that we may have to take a few steps back. So I do have a possible solution. Let's look at a few pictures. This is an example of two brokers both acting as a dual agent. So we got Julie's Real Estate Shop, and we got the line that separates the buyer and the seller. But check it out. We're no longer up here holding hands with them, are we? We're still here. We're part of the transaction, but it's all about being represented by the firm. We're getting them through it. That's the firm's duty. The firm and all the agents in the firm are straddling that wall. It's just that one of you is working specifically with the buyer, and a different one of you is working specifically with the seller. This is two brokers in dual agency. You could also have single agent dual agency. One broker. The firm is still straddling that line. The firm is still straddling that wall, giving that same loyal, equal representation to both. But now one of you is assisting the buyer or the seller through the transaction with that same equal loyalty. I often get questions. Do we have to do dual agency? Do we have to do single agent dual agency? You know, if the firm allows it, then you may be put in a situation. I will tell you too, that some agents, myself included, choose not to be a single agent dual agency. I decided when I got into sales years ago that this was just too sticky for me and I didn't want to get involved. But guys, that's my personal opinion. I don't want you guys' personal opinion to affect your exam, because here's the deal. Your exams are going to ask you what you can do, not what you're going to do. Can you act as a single agent, dual agent under the North Carolina Real Estate Commission Licensed Law and Commission Rule? Yes. And that's the mindset you need to be in for your test. You decide once you get licensed how you want to proceed. Does that make sense? We got to understand all the options. Don't let your personal thoughts or opinions get in the way of your exam. The commission will allow you, once you get licensed, one step at a time, once you get licensed, then you decide how you want to proceed. Fair enough? Dual agency, the simplest breakdown I can offer you. One firm, one transaction, two clients. Questions? You also got your chats set to private. So let's hear from everybody, then we'll take a break. But let's hear from everybody. Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Are y'all second guessing yourselves? I know you guys. Stop it. Everybody in? %25 chance to get a shot at getting it right. What's your favorite? A, B, C, or D? When in doubt, pick your favorite. All right, so Tara is a broker with XYZ Realty. She enters into a listing agreement with the seller. Do we have a client? Yeah, because we've entered into an agency agreement. So we have a seller client. Now, fast forward, Tara finds a buyer that becomes interested in the same property and says, I will represent the buyer. In this situation, Tara may be able to work with both as long as she gets permission to do so. If she just starts acting like a dual agent for both, that's that undisclosed dual agency. You can't. I know this sounds great. I mean, my job as a listing agent is to find a buyer, right? And poof, I have a buyer. But because we would both be represented by both, and I'm not saying we're going to, we're saying we may be able to. The missing piece from that is the informed written consent of both parties. So assuming we get that, then Tara can proceed as a single agent, dual agent. If she just starts practicing dual agency, acting like a dual agent, she is in undisclosed dual agency, which is a violation of license law. Questions on this one? All right. Let's take 10. When we come back, and we'll have time for questions. Yes. But when we come back from break, the possible solution to dual agency, what makes this sit a little bit better with us? So let's take 10. we're back. How are we doing for this last hour? It's a lot. Yes? I get that. I'm such a fan of the power of repetition. This is the first time hearing about dual agency, sub-agency. It's a lot to take in. Take advantage of our YouTube recordings, hear it again and again and again and again and again. See it, read it, hear it. You got to touch it several times for this stuff to stick. Fair? All right. So I'm going to take attendance. Oh, everybody's in. Now, as mentioned, we have a possible solution for dual agency. And that possible solution is called designated dual agency. Designated dual agency is a form of dual agency. What do we say about dual agency? One firm, one transaction, 2 clients, 0 customers. In designated, it is always 2 brokers. There's no such thing as single agent designated dual agency. So far, the difference in the 2 is it's always 2 brokers. Same dual agency, 1 firm, 1 transaction, 2 clients. But now we have 2 brokers. In designated dual agency, the parties have to agree to it. This doesn't happen automatically. The firm has to allow it. Some firms offer designated dual agency, other firms don't. This is why I say it's a possible solution. Don't think this is automatic. When you guys are reading test questions, I need you to see designated dual agency. Don't create it. Let you see it. In designated dual agency, again, we have to have both parties consent to do dual. I gotta get both parties to say yes to dual before we can offer designated. If anybody says no to dual, then designated is not an option. That's what we mean by it's a form of dual agency. So we get everybody on board for dual. The firm should have a company policy. The company policy talks about how we're going to designate, how we're going to proceed. So it's a form of dual if offered by the company. If offered by the company and somebody says no to dual, could I use designated as kind of a carrot? I know we don't want to know what it means yet, but could we use it as a carrot? Maybe get them to say yes to dual to get them to say yes to designated. So we can use it as a carrot. So what does it mean to be designated? In designated dual agency, the BIC appoints 1 person to work exclusively with the seller, and they appoint a different broker to work exclusively with the buyer. Designated brings back exclusivity. Once these parties have agreed to do designated, it's still 1 firm, 1 transaction, 2 clients. But once they've agreed to do designated, 2 agents in the firm are back there holding hands with buyers and sellers. Remember in dual, we were on the screen, but we weren't side by side. We weren't holding hands. Designated allows us to work exclusively 1 with the buyer and exclusively 1 with the seller. So to better understand this, let's go back to our football game. Prior to dual agency, we had exclusive representation. We were the coach. When we entered into dual agency, the firm's role changed and we became the referee. Now that we're going into designated, the firm's role is going to change again. Now I take that back. I just misspoke. Now that we're going into designated, the firm remains in dual. Dual does not go away. But now two agents of your firm go back to being the coach. The firm's still acting as the referee. The firm is still in dual agency, because dual agency is about who? The firm. But what's happened as designated is the broker in charge has appointed one broker to be the coach for the seller, and they have appointed a different broker to be the coach for the buyer. Those two brokers now might as well proceed as if they were two different firms. That's what it means to be designated. So the one of you working with the buyer, once you're designated, now when the buyer asks you how much they should offer, we can tell them less than asking price. If the seller's firm asks you, if the seller's broker asks if they should do any repairs, I can look at that seller and say, no. For those two agents only, advocacy comes back. The firm is still in dual. The firm is still straddling that line. Two agents. There's a couple caveats here. You cannot be designated if you have received prior confidential information about the other party. So if you've been working with the seller and now we're at a point where designated comes up, you have an interested buyer, they've both agreed to dual. Let's see if we can take that a step further and bring exclusivity back to the transaction. The broker in charge may look at you and say, listing agent, do you know anything about my buyer that can harm them in this transaction? And if the listing agent says no, I can designate you to work with the seller. Then they're going to go to the agent that's been working with the buyer. And they're going to say, do you know anything about my seller that could harm them in this transaction? And if they say no, then I can designate you to work exclusively with the buyer. You can't have prior confidential information about the other side going into designation. However, once you've been designated, if you learn something about the other side, I owe it to my client to tell them. That's what it means to be that exclusivity. Like I said, you guys, and you may want to jot this down so you can think about it. Once those two agents have been designated, the two agents proceed, the two brokers proceed as if they were with two different firms. So you can't have that prior confidential information about the other party going into it. So what if you do? What if your broker in charge looks at you and says, okay, I know you've been working with the buyer, and now we're at a point to be designated. Do you know anything about my seller? And you look at the broker and you say, well, I had their listing a couple years ago when I was with another firm. Do you know something that could harm them in this transaction? Yeah, I mean, you knew they were selling, you knew them when they were selling a home. What if you look at your broker in charge and say, well, we're on the same school board PTA together and our kids play soccer. Could it stand to reason you know something about this person? Yeah. I mean, people talk at the PTA, right? What if it slips out that you're selling because you're going through a nasty divorce, right? It doesn't matter how you know something about the other party. The fact is the BIC, the broker in charge, should take that extra step and make sure that there is no prior confidential information. If both parties say, no, I don't know anything, then we can designate. If somebody says, yes, I do, then the BIC has to bring another agent in. They have to bring another broker in. So who am I going to pick on now? Pick on Allison. Hey, Allison, I look up and see somebody. So Allison's been working with my buyer for a couple months now. They've been out looking at properties, and all of a sudden my firm lists something that Allison's buyer is like, ooh, I want to see that. So Allison's got to back up and make sure she's talked to them about dual, make sure she talks to them about designated if I allow it. Again, you guys, don't add designated on your test questions if it's not there. Does everybody hear me? You got to see it. So I allow designated. I go to, let's see, who is my listing agent was Rashawn. I say, Rashawn, do you know anything about Allison's buyers? No, I don't know these people at all. Awesome. Rashawn, I designate you to work exclusively with my seller. Then I go to Allison. I say, Allison, do you know anything about my sellers? And she says, well, I do. And she proceeds to tell me how. And I don't care how, but the fact is she knows something that could be used against them and their negotiating power. I can't designate Allison. That's not fair to my sellers. Remember, I'm still in dual. So then I look up and I see Lindsay and I say, hey, Lindsay, I got a buyer. They're interested in our listing. Allison can't assist them because she knows the seller. Would you be willing to step in and help out? And of course, Lindsay says, yeah, Allison, I'm going to get you a referral fee because let's face it, you went out, you did some business, you worked with this buyer, right? And you did some work, so you deserve something. So I'm going to designate Lindsay because now designated is what's in the best interest of my clients. Dual is what's best for the firm. Designated brings the best interest back for the clients. I'll get Allison a referral fee. We'll work this out. I can't worry about that. The firm's responsibility is to assist the buyer and the seller through the transaction. And so we'll work something out. Lindsay doesn't know Rashawn's sellers or anything about them. So I designate Lindsay. Does that make sense? You cannot have prior confidential information. Now Rashawn and Lindsay are designated. The rest of us are still in dual. It's just those two that have been kicked off the wall. And now that they've been designated, Rashawn and Lindsay can proceed. They might as well be with two different firms. They are full advocates. They are fully representing buyer and seller while the firm remains in dual. We'll see a picture in just a second. So this is one caveat of designated, or another caveat of designated. The firm has to allow it. It's not automatic. The firm has to allow it. Brokers can't be designated if they've received prior confidential information going into designation about the other party. The other caveat with designated is probably the biggest problem topic in all of Unit 7. The provisional broker, which is soon to be you guys, my newly licensed agent, you cannot be designated opposite of your broker in charge. You can be in dual together because dual is about who or what? Dual is about the firm. So you can be in dual together, but the PB and the BIC cannot be designated opposite of each other. And here's why. As a provisional broker, it's a new license status. You got more training, you got more education. I call my PBs my brokers with training wheels. As a PB, you can ride your bike, but only with your training wheels. Your training wheels is the broker in charge. Again, we will talk more about that. I promise. The broker in charge's responsibility is to help their new agents, their new licensees get started. Your broker in charge will probably go with you to your first couple listing appointments. They will coach you through your first couple buyer consultations. The broker in charge is involved in the provisional broker. Does it stand to reason that the BIC knows something about the PB's client? If they're doing their job right, they do. Again, I'm sitting at the buyer consultation with you. I hear this conversation. And then as your BIC, I list something. We could go in dual together, but we can't be designated because, I'm going to go back for 1 minute. We can't be designated because the BIC comes into this with prior confidential information. Weren't they sitting there at the listing appointment? Weren't they coaching you through the buyer consultation? Don't they know something about your client? And because of the very nature of the relationship, the provisional broker and the BIC cannot be designated opposite of each other? I need you to shake your head yes or no. Can they be in dual? Adamantly shaking your head yes. Thank you. That's the problem topic. They can be in dual because dual is about the firm. They can't be designated because designated is about the individual brokers. Any other combination is allowed. You can have a PB designated opposite of a PB. You can have a broker designated opposite of a broker. You could have a broker designated opposite of their broker in charge. You can have a PB designated opposite of their broker. Any other combination is allowed as long as we don't come into this with prior confidential information. Real world, most BICs, as part of their policy, choose not to be designated. Some BICs do sales, some BICs don't. If that bothers you, then ask when you're going for your interview. Does your broker in charge do sales? Will they be competing with me? Some do, some don't. Many BICs that are in sales choose not to be designated at all. But remember, you guys, your test is not asking you what you're going to do. Your test is going to ask you what you can do. Can the broker in charge be designated if they don't have prior confidential information? Yes. Any other relationship is allowed. I cannot think of another combination. Any other relationship is allowed as long as you don't have prior confidential information about the other side.
Julie, did you just say that if there was no prior information between the PB and the BIC, they could do designated?
No, they never.
They never.
Never, never.
That's what I understood. I just thought you said so. Okay.
Thank you. Never ever. Thank you. If I did, I apologize. Never ever. Again, you guys, if the BIC's doing their job and doing it right, they know something about the PBs. Y'all, your broker in charge as you get started, they're going to be in your back pocket. They're with you. I'm telling you right now, you don't get enough in this class to help people buy and sell. We're just building your foundation. You need a strong BIC that's willing to take you by the hand, guide you along as you start getting out there working with buyers and sellers. And again, the very nature of their relationship, the BIC should know something about the provisional broker's client. So because of that, they cannot be designated. Where's the problem topic? The question is going to ask you, can they be in dual together? And the answer is yes, because dual agency is about the firm. The firm. Yes, ma'am, Kiana.
I was going to say, what's another word for designated? Because I'm like getting confused on that.
If I've designated you, I've selected you, I've chosen you.
Okay. So basically it chose the client.
So let's look at a picture. Okay. Here is Julie's real estate shop, still in dual. Are we still straddling this line? We're still in dual, aren't we? But guess what? I have designated or I have kicked one of you off the wall to work exclusively with my buyer. Exclusivity just came back. And then I kicked another one of you off the wall to work exclusively with my seller. Where are the rest? That's just two of you. Where are the rest of us? We're still hanging out in dual. We are still representing both parties. And now that two of you, so now I got, who was it? I got Lindsay as my selling agent. I kicked Lindsay off the wall because Allison knew something about my seller, so she's out. Sorry. I kicked Lindsay off the wall. She's still, she's going to represent my buyer exclusively. I've kicked Rashawn off the wall. You guys are no longer, you two are no longer in dual. Everybody else, though, is still in dual. Everybody else is still in dual. That's it. When you're designated, when we talk about exclusivity coming back, when you're designated for the listing agent, it's all about the seller. When you're designated for the selling agent, it's all about the buyer. And the rest of us are still straddling that wall. The rest of us are still about the firm.
So who gets the commission?
The selling agent, listing agent.
Okay.
How am I going to pay you? I don't know. That's up to my firm's policy. Most firms' policies spell out maybe you're paid more for an in-house transaction. Maybe you're paid the same. The firm's policy would have to spell that out. Does this make us feel a little bit better about dual? Usually does, because that advocacy comes back. And again, you guys, I tell you, not all firms offer designated. For example, what if I was a one-man show? Julie's Real Estate Shop consisted of one broker. Could I offer designated? No, because designated is always about how many agents? 2. So if you're a one-man show, designated isn't even an option. Okay, so now I'm a firm and there's 2 of us. There's me and one of you. We're going to go out on our own and start our own company. Me and you. You ready? Let's go. And everything we do together. We go on listing appointments together. We go on buyer consultations together. We look at our paperwork together. Could we be designated? No, because we know everything. We know all this confidential stuff about each other because we're there. Remember, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So it might be that, and that's just an example, of course. I think most of your bigger firms will allow designated. But again, this is the different options that the firm has to practice agency. And if you're interviewing with a firm and it comes out that they don't offer designated and you really want designated, then that's not the firm for you. You need to go find another firm. Does that make sense? This is why they interview. This is why they bring you guys together. And if you're really against any of this, then don't join that firm. It's so simple. Don't join that firm. If you want dual agency, designated dual agency, then you need to ask them, do y'all offer designated? And if they say no, you know, have a nice day. Thanks. Right? Again, they're not hiring you. We're affiliating. We're figuring out if we can work together. Other questions? Designated? Okay, so we're all at Julie's Real Estate Shop. I'm the broker in charge. And it's Tuesday morning. Tuesday mornings, well, it was, but Tuesday mornings are, I don't know why, but they're popular times for real estate firms to have their sales meeting. Lots of firms does it on Tuesday morning. Each firm is different. Let's say we had our sales meeting today, and we just went over, you know, upcoming events. We got a social next week. Don't forget, we're going to do this, right? We're going to go out together and have some fun as well. Not all just work. We got to play too. Don't forget, we have a class coming up next week, right? We're going over events. We have our meeting. And then I ask, does anybody have a listing coming up that they want to share with us? And so Haley pops her hand up and says, I have a listing coming the end of the week. And I say, awesome, Haley, share it with us. And Haley says, well, it's a 3-bed, 2-bath. It's located in this subdivision. It has a garage, you know, decent school district, right? Haley's talking about the property. Did you learn anything about Haley's sellers that could harm them? Anything? You could go to Zillow and find that information out, right? 3-bed, 2-bath garage. We talk about the property all day long. We need to be careful when we start talking about the people. So Haley's going on and on about the property, all the information you could find if you looked it up online. And I'm not a really good Beck, and I stopped paying attention and I go back here and get me a cup of coffee and another donut, right? And I'm not really paying attention. And Haley keeps talking. Well, this is kind of a tough situation, you guys, because he got a job that's starting the first of the year. So they got to relocate pretty quickly. Did y'all just learn something confidential about Haley Sellers? Did you just learn something that could harm their negotiating power? Guess what? Because I allowed Haley to talk about the people, not a one of you can be designated. Thank you for letting me pick on you, Haley. Not a one of you can be designated because Haley, I allowed Haley to cross that fine line and start talking about the people. So if the opportunity for designated comes up, the person that didn't come to sales meeting today is the one that's going to win. And if I have full office attendance, if you guys are the whole office, then designated is no longer an option for this transaction because all of you now know their motive. All of you now know their reason for selling, which ultimately could harm them in the negotiations. Because what are you going to do if you have a buyer? But I know why they're selling and I know they're on a tight timeline. So let's draw your offer up based around that information. Motivated seller. Remember that confidential information I can't share without my client's written consent. So if Haley's saying she's got a motivated seller, she better have something in writing saying it's okay for her to say that. Something in writing from her seller. You can talk about the property all day long. Do not talk about the people. Because once you've talked about the people, you can't be designated. You've removed yourself from that transaction. Does that make sense? So, again, dual agency, it's all about the firm. Technically, we could sit around and talk about our people all day long because we're all in this together. Remember, when one of us gets a seller, when one of us gets a listing, in a sense, we all get the listing. Just because you can doesn't always mean that you should. By doing this, I call it water cooler gossip. And listen, you guys form friendships. I mean, I have friends with I'm friends with agents with other firms. Lane and I are with two different brokerage firms. Lane and I get together on the regular. We go to lunch, we hang out, we talk on the phone like 4 or 5 times a week. You know what Lane and I aren't talking about though? Each other's clients. Now I may tell Lane, hey man, we got this listing, check it out. I'm talking about the property. You talk about the property all day long. Do not talk about the client, whether you're in the same firm or you're not. In the same firm, you can harm yourself from being designated because you have that prior confidential information. So what I have here is a sample from our listing agreement that goes over with specifically the seller. The buyer's looks very similar. This is our authorization to either do dual agency or exclusive representation. So the seller has to decide, do they allow dual agency or they want exclusive representation at all times and they do not authorize dual agency. It's a one or the other. Either they say yes to dual agency or they say, nope, I don't want to share you with somebody else. I don't want to share you, so I want exclusive representation. And remember what we said, they can change their mind. If they say exclusive representation, it's not like they're locked in. We can always change their mind. If they agree to do dual, seller does or does not authorize the same individual agent to represent both. Some may be okay with the firm representing both, but they don't want to share the individual agent. So we need consent to do that. Also, if they agree to dual, can we allow designated if the firm allows? This is straight from our listing agreement. We're going to see this and more when we get into Unit 18. But I think it helps us now to understand they have choices. You either agree to dual or you don't. It's pretty clear. If they say no to dual, then they are demanding exclusive representation. And remember that seller, you guys. Seriously, you're talking the seller at the listing appointment. The seller says no, absolutely not, and they initial exclusive representation. It's pretty simple, right? Fast forward 4 months, they haven't had much activity, they haven't had much interest, and all of a sudden, who's next? Cynthia brings a buyer to the transaction, and Cynthia says, man, my buyers really want to see your listing, but your guys have said no to dual. Aren't we going to revisit that with the seller? Aren't I going to say, look, I know you said no. I heard you and I respect that. But Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you need to know that we now have an interested party, but because you said no to dual, I can't allow it. So we could always get them to change their mind. Again, basic contract law says the only way to change something in writing is to change it in writing. So you can't have a verbal change. We'd have to see that on the agency agreement. And everybody's initialing, not checking. Everybody good with that? The sellers are initialing. I just put check marks for simplicity. So those check marks represent initials. What do we think? Does designated make us feel a little bit better about agency? I know we tend to get upset with dual. What do you mean I can't be an advocate? And I hear you. I hear you. They gotta offer designated. And it's worth me saying again, for your exams, you need to see that designated is available. Don't assume. It's easy to assume because it's better for the clients. And guys, isn't that why we're here? To help our buyers and sellers achieve the American dream and yada, yada, yada. It's better for them. And this is where we get wrong in our test, I think, because we assume. I need you guys to see that designated is an option. I need you to see that word. Do we rewrite? No, you don't have to. You could do an amendment, but basically what we would do is just cross out and then have the seller's initial and then date the change, kind of showing the, I think that would be the easiest thing. And it shows that change. It shows where they first signed it, and then it shows where we changed our mind 4 months later or whatever. And your firm may have, you know, a different policy. They may want you to do something different. But I think that's the simplest thing to do. If you were with Julie's real estate shop, then that would work. What questions do I have? Des, you guys have got to spend time with it. I don't know another way to say that. You've got to spend time with it. I mean, guys, we've pretty much been all day for the most part on our different agency relationships. Do you think it's important that we understand the different ways that firms can operate? I don't talk to hear myself speak. All right, I need you to make a couple, before we look at the rest, I need you to make a couple edits to your book, if you will. So turn with me to page 162. And we're going to talk more about oral consent for dual agency on Thursday. So just bear with me. In the meantime, on page 162, where it says situation 2, cross it out. Page 162, situation 2. There's some misleading information in there. If you don't ever see it, you won't get confused. Basically, this is addressing the whole, I can change an oral agreement orally, but once it's in writing, I can only change it in writing, and they don't do a good job. So just cross it out. It's more confusing. And while I'm on a roll, fast forward real quick with me to page 175. So 162, situation 2, 175, number 2, cross it out. 175, number 2, y'all see that? That's like a sample test question. Just cross it out. It's not worth it. Very misleading. This stuff is good enough already without the help of misleading information. Has everybody done that? 162, situation 2, 175, number 2, and we're getting there. Bottom of page 163 and over to 164 is a really nice summary of dual and designated agencies. So you have the detailed explanations in your book, but then they give you these key concepts. So remember, once we enter into designated, dual agency is not eliminated. Designated does not remove dual. The firm is still in dual. Designated is a form of dual agency, which means, I'm going to go back for 1 second. If they don't agree to dual, then designate is not an option. So everybody see that? If they don't initial here, that means they're initialing here, the exclusive representation, and designated is not an option. So dual does not go away. One firm or same in-house transaction. Again, guys, some of these big firms have 5 or 6 locations. What matters is that you're all with the same firm. When you affiliate with a firm, if they have multiple locations, they'll let you know. Why? For dual and designated agency. You need to know. Now, understand, just because it's Keller Williams doesn't mean it's all the same firm. There's, it's kind of like McDonald's. Each franchise is independently owned and operated. So if you go with Keller Williams, it doesn't mean you're with the Keller Williams firm across the country. There's a separate individually owned and operated. And again, they'll let you know. They will let you know who else is in their firm. We have to have the written consent for dual and designated no later than the time that we're ready to make the first offer. Again, we're going to learn on Thursday that there's an opportunity. There is a possible opportunity for us to act as an oral, under an oral agency agreement. So we're going to talk about that on Thursday. But bottom line, I got to have it all in writing before I'm ready to present the offer on your behalf. More on that. Once you've been designated, you are exclusive, which means you only act for the principal in which you've been designated to work. You've been kicked off the wall. One of you will work exclusively with my seller. Another one of you will work exclusively with my buyer. If the firm practices designated, this is always interesting to me, the commission doesn't require a company policy. They just recommend it. But guess what? If it's been found that the firm has been mishandling, or the agents in the firm have been mishandling designated, one of the first questions out of the commission's mouth is going to be, do you have a company policy? And if the firm says no, then they don't have their documentation. And what do we document? Everything, whether you're an individual broker or a firm. So they say recommended. I say highly recommended, but it is recommended if you're gonna, and it's stuff like, how is the bit gonna designate? Like, are they gonna ask a series of questions? Once upon a time ago, we didn't have e-documents. We didn't have e-programs to provide e-signatures. You know, once upon a time ago, we had all of our files and folders in the file room. Anybody remember the file room? It's about as exciting as it sounds. It was a room just jam-packed full of file cabinets. And it used to be, who has access to that? Because if anybody has access, that means that an agent could show up in the middle of the night and go through the files. Today, we're all on using e-programs. Security is a lot more tight than the file room. But those are just the kind of things that should be considered in the company's policy. How do we designate? What questions do we ask? Who has access to the documents, to the electronic transactions? The two caveats: you can't be designated if you go into this with prior confidential information about the other side. That's where the BIC needs to take the steps to ask the questions, to have the conversation. The BIC, or whoever the company policy allows, is who designates. Brokers don't designate themselves. They are appointed or they are designated by their BIC or manager or whomever. And then the problem topic: the BIC and the PB cannot be designated opposite of each other. Can they be in dual together? Shake your head, yes or no. Can the BIC and the PB be in dual? And I see head bobs and thumbs ups, and I agree. They can be in dual, because dual is about the firm. They can be in dual. They cannot be designated. See why I call this a problem topic? I wasn't joking. What questions do I have? So we're still talking about the different types of agency relationships. And the last type of agency relationship that we have to mention real quick is the relationship between the property manager and the owner. The owner hires the agent to manage their property using a property management agreement. The property manager is kind of the extension. They're like the arm of the owner. Again, I got a whole unit dedicated to property manager, so we're not going to say too much more about it here, other than the fact that property management is another type of agency relationship that the firm may choose to practice. Some firms will do sales only. Some firms will do property management only. Some firms will do both. What the heck? The firm can choose to operate however they want. And if you want to go into, you want to be working with that investor owner to help them manage their properties, that's the last type of agency relationship that we're going to talk about. And in a rental situation, in residential sales, the tenant is very rarely represented. Now, commercial transactions, you may have landlord and tenant represented, but in residential, usually the landlord is the client of the property manager. The tenants are the customer. Every